Okay, welcome back to video 9, and we're at Exodus 13 on Matthew 22:32. We just went over the Christ the stumbling stone, and of course if you got into that message, that's the biggest message in the New Testament, is about the Jews stumbling over this message of Christ in the Old Testament from the books of Moses, which pastors don't teach Christ from the Genesis. They just don't teach that. And Christ taught it, Paul taught it, he said he taught it, and he said, Paul specifically said in Acts 3 times, I think, that he proved the message of Christ, and this was after they had already killed Christ, that they went back and he was talking to the judges and chief priests and different people, and he says that he proved the message of Christ, that Christ was the Messiah, through the books of Moses and the prophets and of course Psalms. So if that's the case, if you can prove the message of Christ coming to the 12 tribes or whatever you're trying to prove, that you would have to start with the books of Moses, because that's what Paul did, that's what Christ did, that's my whole point. And pastors don't teach that message as if there's no message of Christ in the book of Genesis or any of these other books. But in fact it is, and they're in here in these quotes. So let's go to 22:32 and we'll start with that. See what they're talking about. Now, we're kind of over in 21:42, which is not that far back. Stone which the builders rejected. Then he says, let's just continue from where we were, 21:43. I therefore tell you, the kingdom of God should be taken from you. Okay. And he's talking to who? Well, we already said. He's really gave him this parable of the tenants and the vineyard. Is the same idea, exactly. Vineyard with the tenants, and he says the tenants murdered the son, and they called him the heir. Okay, that's verse 38, so that's 21:38. So it's this parable of the vineyard that he's talking to, and what did he say? Well, to get the context, and of course I mentioned it, you got to go all the way back to 21:23, where he entered the temple. He says the chief priests and the elders approached him. He says, by what authority? Okay, well the authority was that he was this heir, in other words the son of God, of this parable, which he quoted. Alright. And if you just back up to 32, John came to you on a mission of righteousness, and you put no faith on him. But the extortioners and the harlots believed on him. So the common people, in other words, believed on him, while you didn't, and you were the ones that were supposed to be teaching this message. While you, looking on, did not repent. That's verse 32. Okay, well, if they had repented and done what was right, then he would have accepted them. But since they didn't repent, they thought they were smart and they knew all this stuff. And you have the same thing today. You can take the truth to any pastor, and if they don't accept it because they just want to continue teaching what they're teaching because they think it must be right, because the leadership and all these people with the PhDs are teaching what they're teaching. See, so that must be correct, because otherwise you'd have to be saying that your seminaries are wrong. That's what you'd have to say, right? Well, same thing here. You would have to say that, well, all these educated people must be wrong then if you're right. That's what they would say. So you have exactly that today. You can walk in any church, take the truth to a pastor, and he'll reject it, because they're looking at it from an intellectual standpoint. They're not looking at it from the possibility that maybe they're wrong. There's a few that will kind of start looking at that and think about it, but not many. So at any rate, in 21:43, the kingdom of God taken from you is taken from the leadership then, which rejected the message of Christ. That is the stumbling stone, because he gave you the prophecy. Whoever falls upon this stone shall be broken. But, in other words, Christ. But upon whoever it falls, it will crush him to dust. So eventually at the end, you reject Christ, he'll reject you, and that will be the weeping and gnashing of teeth. They'll be rejected from the kingdom of God. And who has rejected the message of Christ for the last 2,000 years? Well, obviously the Jews in Israel today. You've got, if they accept the message of Christ, that they teach all this, and they teach Christ just like Christ taught and just like Paul taught, they teach Christ from the book of Genesis, as I've already laid out, then they're Jews for Christ. They're accepted. But how many in Israel today fit that? What, 1-2% or what? I don't know. I have no idea, but I can tell you it appears that the majority of them, and especially the leadership of Israel, don't accept Christ. So why would you pay any heed to people who are against Christ? That would be the same thing as us saying, well, we should be promoting these Pharisees and these people here. These are the children of God. These are the chosen people, the leadership that rejected Christ. No, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. But that's what we're doing. It's insane. But that's what we're doing. And then you go down to 21:45. And when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he spoke about themselves. Yes, he just gave them the parable of the vineyard. That was about them. Okay? But they dreaded the public who held that he was a prophet. Yeah, they wanted to kill him, but they didn't really want to do it in front of everybody. So, chapter 22, kingdom of heaven. Then he goes through another parable. Right? While the others, seizing the officers, maltreated and murdered them, the king. Alright, well, really, this is the parable of the vineyard, but in another viewpoint, different words and so on. But at any rate, wedding guests, it's really a parable of the vineyard, but it's just laid out in a different way. Okay, and he gets to 14, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Many are called, few chosen. So the many that are called are the ones that believe on his message. Jews for Christ, few are chosen. Well, many are called. So he's really calling the leadership to repent, because he just said that. But they don't, because they think they're too intelligent. Okay. This is not a hard message to understand, but, you know, once you're in this high positions and the people of the world all, you know, adore you, then it's hard to say, well, I was wrong and this is the real message of Christ. Yeah. It's hard to change. Otherwise, once you change, now you got to tell people that, well, this message was wrong, now you got to go back and explain it. And then most of the people in your church are going to reject the new message that the correct one, your church, and then your church is going to fail. Okay, not enough money coming in. So it's all about money and maintaining the building. It's not about teaching the message of Christ properly. If you realize the message of Christ that your teaching is wrong, well, you can't change, because then you're going to lose most of the people in church. It's just obvious. And then your church is going to fail, and the building is going to close up or be sold off to someone else who was teaching the popular message. Because teaching Christ properly is not a popular message. It never has been. Alright. But he just takes the few that are chosen, and that's it. The rest of them that don't want to hear the truth, well, okay. At any rate, 22, 13, 14, we were at 14, then he goes on and talks about their own pupils, verse 16, the Herodians, so those are Edomite Jews. Oh, and they say, well, we see that you are true and that you teach the way of God in truth, caring nothing about anyone. Yeah, Christ did, but they didn't. Not looking at human position. That's the whole point. It's not about your position. It's not about your church building. It's about who's teaching the truth, who isn't. Alright, so everybody knows that. Alright, get down to 23. During the same day, the Sadducees. Okay, now he's talking to the Sadducees. And they put this in front of them, this idea about these 7 brothers so on. Everybody knows that. And Christ in verse 29 says, you're in error. So, you don't comprehend the scriptures, nor yet the power of God. Same thing. Same thing we got today. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as angels of God in heaven. So, okay, so what he's telling you is these people of the 12 tribes who are going to be resurrected, who have the hope of Abraham, which is the resurrection, as Paul said, resurrection of the dead. That's why they didn't like him. He's talking about the 12 tribes being resurrected. That was the hope that the 12 tribes have been praying for daily. We already covered that in Acts. That's the hope. They knew about Christ as the Son of God who would resurrect them. Abraham knew that. But here he says, once you're resurrected, you are as angels of God in heaven. Actually, in other verses, it says they're over the angels. So, all right, respecting the resurrection of the dead. All right, well, wait a minute. This is Christ right here talking about the resurrection of the dead. Well, if the 12 tribes didn't know about the resurrection of the dead, of course they know about the resurrection of the dead. And he mentions it. Christ himself mentions it right here. That the 12 tribes are going to be resurrected. How do we know he's talking about the 12 tribes being resurrected? Because if you read on, however, have you not read the statement from God to you, which to you, by the way. So by you, he's talking to the Sadducees. So at any rate, he's talking to the leadership of the 12 tribes, which says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, why would Christ tell you that this is about the resurrection of the dead, and then go right back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if God was the God of the whole world? Well, he says God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And the living are these that are resurrected. And he's pointing out right there that the resurrected are these from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which we know is the 12 tribes. We know Esau is not in this. He's already said multiple times, Esau was rejected. Esau is going to be destroyed. You know, the Edomites, in other words. And in another verse, it actually says he hated Esau. Yeah, Esau didn't follow his law. Rejected him. Went off and married people of other races and just, you know, besides other things, gave up his birthright. So, verse 34. He silenced the Sadducees. They collected at once, one from among them, a liar. So now they send somebody that's a liar. Okay, so that's the next one. Now, the one liar, since we're gonna be back here, we see Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus. We're all gonna be back here in the same section. Let's just go on. Solomon is still in the same context. Teacher, which commandment of the law is the most important? And he just says, love your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your intellect. That command is first. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. In these two commands are comprise the whole law and the prophets. Well, of course, what he's telling you is, yes, these 10 commandments all revolve around loving your neighbor, because if you love your neighbor, you won't commit any of these violations of these other commands. So that is what the commands are about. He gives you these commands because they're about loving God and loving your neighbor. Everything is about loving God and loving your neighbor. In other words, you don't go and make war on your neighbor. You don't have sex with your, you don't desire your neighbor's wife. You don't have sex with her. You don't steal from your neighbor. You don't move his boundaries. There's all these things. It all revolve around loving your neighbor and loving God, because obviously God doesn't want you to do those things. And he doesn't want you worshiping other gods, in other words. So, sure. And just go back and read the first 2 commandments. He tells you, you know, that's the people that follow his commands are the ones that are given mercy. That's the whole point of what David says about mercy. Following his law, and then he'll have mercy. Right. Repenting, then you'll have mercy. It's commandment number 2. There it is. And he just sums up, yes, he's not telling you don't follow his law. He says, well, all of these laws, which you have to follow, really boil down to loving me and loving your neighbor. And repentance. We just read that, right? Okay. Alright, now we'll go back to the Pharisees. Verse 41. When the Pharisees were assembled, and Jesus asked them, okay, who do you think is the Messiah? Whose son is the Messiah? David's. Of course, they knew the Messiah was going to be David's son. But then he asked them, okay, well, how then David, under the influence of the Spirit, called him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, or God said to my God. You can look at it in different Bibles, and it will state it slightly different. Be seated at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. And that quotes Psalms 110 right above. So we've actually made it all the way down to Psalms. In other words, the other one was Leviticus 19, just above. Love your neighbor as yourself was Leviticus, and then this one, Psalms 110. However, he says, Christ says, if therefore David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? None were able to answer him a word. Yeah, well, because obviously Christ had to exist before David, and that's the whole point. Christ existed. It quotes Deuteronomy 18:15, and we'll see that quote in here when we get to it, where Moses talked about Christ. Yeah, they actually gave a prophecy about Christ. It's Deuteronomy 18:15, as I recall. All right, so let's go look these up. 22:13 goes to Exodus 3:16, and then obviously everybody knows this. Kind of back up to 14, when God responded to Moses, I am what I am. So Moses asked him, well, what am I going to tell the people? You know, what do I call you? I am that I am, which actually means Yahweh. I am Yahweh. See? So really, this is, it says God responded to Moses, I am what I am, but actually this is Christ. It's Christ is speaking to Moses. Now, I've kind of gone over all that in the Rock Was Christ, pointing out that Christ struggled with Jacob, all that. Yeah, it's actually Christ, not God, and I've gone through all the reasons why it has to be Christ. But obviously that's another few hours of teaching, and we're not going to do that here. You just have to look at my videos. That's why these videos build on each other. You have to start at the beginning if you want to see everything. Say thus, the ever-living God of your forefathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He never says he's the God of the world. He only ever says he's the God of the 12 tribes, the chosen, the elect, the predestinated, the people he foreknew. He always uses these terms. He says all this was predestinated, even himself from the beginning. So it's always about the 12 tribes. He's never predestinated the whole world. He's only predestinated this family who he makes. Oh, well, what does he make? Okay. Well, and he repeats this God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob 100 times. Well, let's go see what he makes. And what he makes is over in chapter 19. So just bump up to chapter 19 while you're sitting here. All right, verse 3. Then Moses went up to God, here again, and the ever-living, that's Christ, called to him from the hill, because everybody knew that Christ was the Son of God, even though it says God, it's talking about Christ, the ever-living. Say this to the house of Jacob, all 12 tribes, and inform the children of Israel, all 12 tribes. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, lifted you on the wings of eagles, and brought you to me. So now, if you will listen to my voice, keep my commands, or my laws, in other words, follow his law. Go, wait a minute. They don't have his law yet. The 10 Commandments are after this. So he's telling you to follow his law before they actually have the law written down, right? Okay, yeah. That's because they already knew about the law. They already knew the laws. Of course they did. Then you shall be to me a peculiar people. More than all the peoples on the earth, you shall be to me a royal priesthood and a holy nation. These are the words you should speak to the children of Israel. Exactly. So here you go. He's going to take this family, the house of Jacob, children of Israel. We know that he's talking to all 12 tribes at that point. Okay? And part of this royal priesthood, he just explained in chapter 18. If you go back to chapter 18, he's explaining about this royal priesthood, who these people are going to be because of what they do. Alright, so Moses was administering all justice to the people. That's, let's see, starting, at any rate, you start in 13, but it's Jethro, the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moses, which it says at the 18:1, which is talking to Moses. Okay, it says the father-in-law, that's Jethro, saw all he did and says, you know, you sit alone, all the people stand before you from morning till night, and he still can't hear all these cases. So he's the only one administering justice to the 12 tribes. Alright, so then Moses says, because all the people come to me to inquire if they ever living. Okay, they want to know. What should we do? Now, we have this contention between ourselves. What should we do? Whoever among them has a dispute, verse 16, comes to me and I decide between man and man, and I make known the decision of God and His laws. So this is a justice system based on God's law. Okay, but God's laws are not written down until you get over to chapter 20. You see that? Yeah, they all knew about the laws. The laws were taught, followed by Abraham. Abraham had a justice system, just like I said. I think it was chapter 22. I still haven't gone back and looked, but it's on the chart. Abrahamic covenant chart, just go back and look, you'll see. He set up a justice system based on God's law, so he had to know God's law. That's why he was a friend, because he did exactly what it's saying to do right here. You have to have a justice system based on his laws. That's what Moses was doing. Father-in-law said, well, you're not prudent because their affairs are more than you're able to bear. That's verse 18 alone. Therefore, listen, I'll advise you. So his father-in-law from, was that Midian maybe? I forget. At any rate, is advising him, instructing them in the decisions. Says, let now the people appear before God and bring their affairs to God and instruct them in the decisions of His laws, inform them the way they should walk and the acts they should do. Also choose from yourself from all the people. Okay, so pick from all the people, think election, and choose for yourself strong men who fear God and hate bribes, and place over them as place over the 12 tribes then as chiefs of thousands, chiefs of hundreds, chiefs of 50s, chiefs of 10. So there's 4 levels of courts he's talking about. Let them judge the people at all times. Let only all the great affairs be brought to you. Let them judge all the little matters, and thus ease yourself, for they load you. So the little matters then, the smallest matters, misdemeanors, are judges of 10s. Those are the easy ones. However, you have judges that can take weightier matters, chiefs of 50s, judges over chiefs of hundreds, and then judges over chiefs of thousands. So you have multiple levels of court. So you can appeal if it's your judgment to a higher court. It's the exact same court system that was designed here in America by our forefathers, which you can read about in Blackstone's commentaries and all those kinds of things. It goes way back to the beginning of the common law and the idea that we're to judge ourselves. But you have to have men, like it said, the best men who cannot be bribed. So the only people you can find that cannot be bribed are people from your church. The best men of your church are the only ones you can place that kind of confidence in, and that doesn't come overnight. That's from what you see from them over a period of time. So you have to choose and see their history and see what they've been doing for the last 10 years before you can put them in that kind of position and make, that kind of personal judgment about these people that you're going to put in these places. Well, okay, that's what you're supposed to do. If you want to be these people, everybody claims that, oh, they're going to be part of this royal priesthood. No, you're not going to be part of the royal priesthood. You're only going to be part of the royal priesthood if you do what it said right here, which is the explanation of the royal priesthood and the people he accepts. Okay? The people who he accepts are the people who accept their responsibility to control their government by electing the right kind of people to that government, which is the way our government was designed to operate originally. Now, we can still have that system of government, except the churches are not involved in it. The churches say, oh, no, we don't have to do any of this stuff. No, they want to be part of the royal priesthood. That's in Revelation. Yeah. 1:6, 1:7, the kindred people are the 12 kindred tribes, which it gives you in chapter 7 and then again in chapter 14. And it's the 12 kindred tribes in Revelation chapter 12. Okay. Those are the people, that's these kings and priests at the beginning of Revelation, and just look at your cross-reference. What is it cross-reference to? It comes back to where we just were yesterday in 1 Peter 2:10, the royal priesthood. You look at the cross-reference to that, and what does it go to? It goes to the 12 tribes. It quotes Hosea 1, 9, and 10. You go look at that. Oh, well, that's the 12 tribes it's talking about. Of course it is. And here it is. And there it is. God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, my people, Israel. But it's the ones that follow God. It's the ones that do exactly what he's telling you right here. Okay, well, we're not doing that. Yeah, exactly. That's why you're going to be judged. That's why he's got to come back, because your judgment system in America is just completely destroyed. It's been destroyed. How long has it been since the churches of America got together and said, hey, let's pick, we got this great person over here that could be a good judge. We have this great person here, this Christian person that cannot be bribed, who could be our governor, who could be in this position or that position, who puts them on the ballot. Because it's the will of the people to put the best person they can find on the ballot because they want a godly government. Well, we don't want a godly government apparently because the churches are not involved in it. Alright, but the churches, well, what do? They got an ungodly government. That ungodly government started making laws and created this 501c3 among other things, and then told the churches, oh, you need to be part of that. You need to have this number so you can be exempt from our taxes, which didn't apply to them to begin with. That was a violation of the Constitution. So they take one violation and make it worse. Yeah, the 501c3 does not apply to churches. Can't apply. It would be a violation of the Constitution. Right there. That is. First Amendment, the Bill of Rights. Yeah. Well, we don't want to talk about that. The only person I can think that's really talked about that, Judge Roy Moore talks about it. He went out and went to multiple churches way back in, what was that, right around 2004 and so forth. Went out to these churches all over America and told them this stuff. Told them that, 501c3 does not apply. And we have this unregistered church movement or unincorporated church movement, and we have the Indianapolis Baptist Temple who was attacked, and now they're telling people, look, this 501c3 does not apply to a real church. A real church doesn't get a number from the government and is not controlled by the government, because as soon as you take the number, now the government, you're giving the government control over you. When it didn't have, you were exempt. In Article 1 of the Bill of Rights, you were exempt. The churches were exempt. That's what the law means. And that's what the Constitution says. You could have stood on that. So you've completely destroyed your churches to the point that all God can do at this point is come back and destroy your nation. Judge the house of God, completely destroy your nation, end all your warmongering, get rid of all this all these institutions you're created are all going to be destroyed by Christ because they're not, they don't fit within his royal priesthood, and he's coming back for his royal priesthood. So when he comes back, there's only a small group of people that he can take that are the remnant that, read the stuff and say, oh, okay, well, I agree with it. I agree with it. Sure, this is exactly what we need to do. Follow these commandments. We need to be this royal priesthood, and this is how we be it. We get together. Our churches get together. They, say, oh, we got this guy, we got that guy, and they create these statesmen because they teach all this stuff from day one, 101 Christianity, right? From the very beginning. You teach Christ from the beginning, from the books of Moses, just like it says in the New Testament. You teach all this applies to the 12 tribes. You teach people, oh, well, who are we? Well, we are these people, these Jews for Christ, and we always have been, because we are the 12 tribes. That's why we're teaching it. Okay, but now this message has been dumbed down to the point where churches just teach ethics and really don't do a whole lot. I hardly even want to talk to any of these pastors. I mean, you can't tell them anything. They don't want to listen. So, and they wouldn't change even if they knew you're right. Most of them wouldn't change. All right, but you should notice commandment number 2, verse 5 says 20. Exodus 20, and that was what we looked at the other day. We didn't really come over and look at the commandments. Everybody knows them. But if you look at commandment 2, 20, verse 5, right? Serving your ever-living. I'm a jealous God, visiting the sins of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. Well, you hate him by not doing what he just told you to do. He just told you. You were supposed to be a peculiar people. You're supposed to have a proper justice system based on his laws. He will remain with you always. That was 19:9 if you read about it. I will come to you in a cloud of fire. I will pass by. The people shall hear me talk to you, and also I will remain with you always. Yes, if you just do what I tell you to do, just follow his law. You're not doing it, all right? So I'll visit your children. So it's not just you. What does he say? If you don't do this, the children to your 3rd and 4th generation are going to have these problems until they change and go back to following his law, back to having a proper justice system, which means when you do that, you love God, you love Christ, right? And you love your neighbor, because that's how everything stays on a proper keel, is when you follow his law and you have justice based on that law. If you don't have justice based on that law, everything's crazy. Look at your nation. Everything's crazy, all right? But I show mercy for thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Yes, in another place he says thousands of generations. So he continues. In other words, if you just do what he says, he continues generation after generation after generation. It says thousands of generations. You can look that up. I can't quote it. To those who love me and keep my commandments. So, yes, you have to keep his commandments. Absolutely. And it's all based on loving God, which it comes from keeping his commandments. Right. You can't love God unless you keep his commandments. It tells you that. How could you not see that? It's impossible not to see it. All right. Let's go to the next one. Of course, we've already gone through this, so let's just go to Deuteronomy 6:5. Alright, start with chapter 6. And these are the commands, the constitution, and decrees which your ever-living God commands you to learn, to practice in the land which you will possess. Exactly. Because otherwise your government does not work. You must fear your ever-living God. Preserve all the constitution and commandments which I command you. Exactly. Because you don't love God, and you don't love your neighbor unless you do that. So he doesn't change anything in the New Testament. And how could anybody think anything's changed? You and your children and the children of your children, think posterity all the time of your life. That's posterity. So your posterity to its end of its generations. That's what posterity means. Listen therefore, as Israel, keep and practice the command, so that you may prosper, you may increase greatly. Okay, well, your children, your bearing of children for the white race has been much less than replacement value, so it's dying, so it's committing suicide. It's been like that for years, but now, just in a very short period of time, your country will be completely taken over, and the white race is already dead. I mean, there's no way. The only way the white race could continue from here on out would be for us to go back to having, like 7 children. Yeah. To get back to where we would have to actually expand from today, we would have to start having about 7 children, most families, because not every family will ever have 7 children. So the ones that can, in other words, they'd have to have at least 7 children. Otherwise, you're committing genocide, which is what you're doing. All right. Well, and he told you that. Yeah. If you back up to verse 29, there will be prosperity to them and all their children forever. Think posterity. If they keep the commands. Right? All right, let's go on. We're in 6:3. Listen, Israel, our ever-living God's a single life. So, think Christ. Therefore, love your ever-living with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Let these words I command you be in your heart, and teach them to your sons. Speak about them while sitting in your house, journeys, lying down, rising up. Bind them as ornaments, and blah, blah, blah. Frontlets, write them on the doors. When the ever-living God brings you to the country which he promised to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, 12 tribes. He'll give you great and beautiful cities that you didn't even build, houses full of furniture you didn't make, fortresses which you didn't fortify, vineyards and olive yards which you didn't plant. You may be eaten. All right, the reason he's doing all that is because you're following his law and you're doing what it just said right back there that creates this royal priesthood. The only reason he does this is because you're doing those things he just told you. That's why it's in this layout. First he tells you Exodus 3:16, and everybody knows 19:6, the royal priesthood, and then you're a chosen people if you just do those things he just told you, right? Follow those laws he just put back here in Exodus, right? Teach your posterity to do the same thing. All right, that's why it's in this order. You go down to 6, you've got, multiple quotes to this section, or cross-references. Yeah, and we're not even looking at cross-reference. I'm just trying to do quotes. But you got all these cross-references to the New Testament. You should come back here. You shall not try your ever-living God. That's verse 16. You shall carefully preserve the commands, the proofs, constitutions, and you shall practice justice and right. So that's a justice system based on his laws. He says that at least probably 1,000 times, all the way through the Bible. If it's not 1,000, it's 500. I don't know how many times it is, because you just can't go back and put it all on a sheet of paper, but it's a bunch. Proper justice system, that's why a house of God is judged in Revelation. I've got a whole chart on it. All right? And if you do that, in the sight of ever-living, you'll prosper and possess the beautiful country that the ever-living promised to your fathers, to repulse all your enemies. Think Christ the rock. That's Christ the rock that repulses your enemies. Okay. As the ever-living will do. Well, the ever-living is Christ, because he just says he's the one that will do it. So the ever-living back here is Christ. Again. And when you're saying, then he just continues over and over and over. Follow his law, follow his law, follow his law. Don't make treaties with non-Israelite people. That's chapter 7, verse 3. Don't take their sons and daughters. Don't intermarry with any other people, because you are a people, 7, Chapter 7, verse 6. Devoted to your ever-living. Your ever-living God chose you to be a people for himself, separated from all people. So, there you go. The people, the Christian people who understand this are separated because they don't marry with other races. And he chose you when you were the least of all peoples, love you because of keeping the oath which he swore to your fathers. Okay, so that goes all the way back to Abraham. In other words, Abraham followed his law, and when he told him to sacrifice Isaac, he was willing to do it. So he brought you out with a strong hand, freed you from the house of bondage. That's freeing you from the house of bondage was a prophecy he gave to Abraham. That's 15, Genesis 15, I don't know, 8 I think. Somewhere right there. He gave a prophecy to Abraham that he would free them. Well, here it is. Speaking about that prophecy. Oh, here you go. So, therefore know that the ever-living, verse 9, is God, the God who faithfully keeps his covenant and shows favor to those who love him and regard his commands for 1,000 generations. That's what I just said. Commandment 2. Just said that. Repays his enemies, those who hate him to their face. Think Jews against Christ, because he said they hated Christ. They killed him by destroying them. He will not delay to repay those who hate him. Therefore, preserve his law. Right? I command you, practice them. There will be a reward if you listen to these decrees. In other words, following his law and preserving them and practicing them. Again, over and over and over. And what was the reward? Verse 13, the fruit of your body, have children. You'll continue to produce children and your race will not be destroyed, which right now, if you just look around, the white race is committing genocide. So it's doing, not following his law, and therefore it's doing exactly what it says there. If you don't do it, then you'll be destroyed. You're being destroyed, and eventually you're going to be down to just the remnant. Plus a few others that finally get it. Okay, fruit of your body, fruit of your grounds, talking about your food, your corn, your grapes, your oil, cattle, sheep. You shall be more blessed than any other people. That's verse 14. Well, you were. Now you're not. Although you think you are. Because you can go make war on the world and you've got, what was it, like 200 and something military installations in other countries. I don't know, it was crazy. We're all over the world making war, but we're 20 trillion in debt doing it. And then as soon as that collapses, then everybody knows what's going to happen. It's judgment on the house of God. Judgment on the 12 tribes for not following his law. That's what it is. And, you know, who's lying to you? Well, every time you go to church, it's the people who run your church, the pastors and the teachers that are lying to you. You think they can't just read this stuff and understand it? Of course they can. If they don't, then there's a real problem. Alright. Put all the diseases on those who hate you, verse 15. And everybody knows this. Everybody's read it. Leviticus 19:18. Alright, so let's go back. 19:18. It's the ever-living speaking with Moses. 19:1. Alright? In other words, follow his law. Keep his Sabbaths. And he'll bless you. It says that thousands times if it says it once. Alright, 19:18. Alright, you shall not take revenge upon the child of your neighbor. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the ever-living. So, same idea. But 15, you shall not do wrong instead of justice. So justice based on the law. That's what he's talking about. Tattoos. Shouldn't tattoo your body. That's verse 28, right? Consecrate your fruit. It shall remain upon it for 3 years for a consecration. That's verse 23. 4th year, all its fruits shall be devoted as thanks. So, talking about your fruit trees. You should consecrate those, yeah, so you'll have the fruit from the tree. Shouldn't turn to fortune tellers. How many of those we got? That should be completely outlawed. Well, it is outlawed. When a foreigner resides in your land, you should not oppress him. You shall love them as yourselves, for you are foreigners. However, they are required to follow his law. Person who turns the spirits into wizards. That's Leviticus 20, verse 6. Whatever person outrages his father or mother, let him put to death. Yeah. Then you got adultery and blah, blah, blah. So, all these are, you might as well just say, these are just like part of the Ten Commandments. It's no different. You gotta, you gotta have a justice system that deals with this kind of stuff. You're not supposed to just put them in jail and then pay money to put them in jail. Shouldn't have, 98% of the people in jail shouldn't be there. There was no idea of big prison systems here. You're supposed to follow his law. You are not doing it, so that's why you're judged. Anyway, so we're there. That's and then we'll come back. We kind of read the last one, Psalms 110, but we're at the our minute mark, so we'll jump off here. This was video 9. We'll come back with video 10 at Psalms 110:1. I'm sorry on these pastures, but it's just a no-brainer. This is not difficult. It's not difficult. I've already been through the Gentiles and clearly shown how the Gentiles are the 12 tribes and only occasionally are non-Israelites. It's not even hard to understand. It's not hard to understand that all the stuff being mentioned links back to the Old Testament and that the context is to the 12 tribes and that Christ told one group to go to their kindred tribes. He commanded it. But, your pastors reject that idea and want to go out and say Gentiles are non-Israelites. The Bible doesn't say that. Just an inserted word. It just meant nations. If you just go back and think of it as nations and then try to figure out the nation of who's it talking about, you'd figure it out. It's 12 tribes. These same royal priesthood. It's the reason he's quoting this stuff. It's trying to make a point. It's not sinking in. That's why you're going to be judged, because your country's been destroyed now. So, but all you can do now is just be part of the remnant. All right? Desire all these things after your country's destroyed. So, thanks for watching, and pass these on to your pastors and those that need them. And, the pastors need them more.